record. And then I'm going to share. Where's my thing? Hold on. Thought I was ready. Share. Oh, there it is. Move that out of my way. All right, you see this okay?
Yes.
Woohoo. Preparing for an annual audit. It's only funny because I'm in the middle of our actual audit and it's a killer. We have a Julie can understand this. We switched audit firms this year, so it's a first year audit for us, and so it's absolutely insane. I think this will be kind of quick and short, and then see if you have any questions. So could just get going. So how come I can't move the slide? There we go. Don't panic, because I always start with this with treasurers. It's not scary. Okay, so here's what we're going to talk about: the goals, purpose of an audit, who conducts an audit. As treasurers, kind of required documents would want to be pulled together. How to get ready, what to expect the auditor to do, how to respond to questions, and then how to communicate the results of the audit to the board and the club. So just by way of an introduction, when we say audit, an audit has a very, very specific meaning to CPAs. And essentially, there are 3 levels of review that CPAs can do: an audit, a review, or a compilation. So an audit is the most intense kind of level of scrutiny over financial statements. A review is kind of the next level, which is what we do for the region every 2 years. And then a compilation is really just means somebody that helps you kind of put your books together. So when I say audit in terms of our club audits, I don't mean that kind of audit at all. It's more just a very kind of loose, informal review of the financial records to make sure everything's in order. It's not including detailed testing of transactions to make sure they happened right. It's really more just kind of another set of eyes on the club's financials to make sure that everything's accounted for, that no money's missing, that payments are being made as they're authorized and all that kind of stuff, which we'll get into. So I'm using the term audit here because we sort of call it that within our clubs. Just to understand, if anybody ever questions the use of that word, it's a legitimate question, because we're not actually talking about an audit in the most literal sense. So really what I wanted to do, I know all of you aren't club treasurers, but that's okay. Somebody will probably watch this that is. So help treasurers prepare. This is really intended more for the treasurers in preparation for it than it is for the audit, whoever's doing the audit themselves, but we'll cover a little bit of both. To review documents, things to have ready, and to discuss what kind of communication to expect at the end. Let me just stop by saying, do all of you have an audit in your club every year? And who typically does that?
Our CPA.
Okay. So you have
an outside CPA.
You have someone outside of the club that you pay?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. How about you, Julie?
Basically our finance committee. So we have, usually it's been the board, right now it's been the board president and our board secretary, because nobody else volunteered.
Okay.
And they just come in, just come to my house, review the stuff,
Yeah,
and then report back and say if they have any recommendations.
okay. Ours is also finance committee, but the finance committee consists of me and me alone. So basically I do ours. Just curious. So kind of know what I'm talking about. So the purpose is this: it's not, to certify or say anything really externally. It's very much about instilling confidence within the club that people that are handling the money are handling it appropriately and accounting for it and reporting on it appropriately, and that we're using our funds the way we're supposed to. So it's pretty basic. This is kind of small. So who conducts the audit? I just kind of asked about that. It should be someone that doesn't have authority to transact on behalf of the club. So someone that doesn't have access to your banking records, someone that doesn't have access to sign checks, someone that's really kind of removed from it. It can certainly be a club member. It doesn't have to be. Financial knowledge is preferable, not absolutely required. You know, someone could probably work their way through it. That's not necessarily a finance person at this level. It is important to maintain that kind of objectivity over the record keeping. So you have someone working on the audit that's also a part of the transactions, then it can get a little tricky. So, you know, it sounds like, I know we don't have a lot of people on the call, but at least here we have a split already of external to the club versus club members that aren't in the treasurer role that participate. So it just really depends on what you want to do.
Well, I will say we also have a member of our club, or there's a committee. This last year it happened to only be one person, but we do have people within the club that review the records also before they go to the CPA.
That makes sense.
Other than the treasurer.
Okay. So these are, and I'm kind of just presenting this from my point of view and what I do when I do this, but these are kind of the things that you know, an auditor would look for. So your monthly reports, you know, what are you reporting out to the board? Bank statements, an accounting ledger, which I use that kind of loosely. It could be, I generally like to just work from a trial balance. It could be a financial report. It could be, it depends on if you're using a software program or not. Some people do, some people don't. But whatever kind of record there is that kind of helps, you know, list out all the transactions that are happening. Copies of checks, requests for checks or support and documentation requesting funds going out. I didn't list on here, but should have credit card statements, especially if they're, you know, if they're tied to the bank, they may show up there. If they're not, some clubs have, you know, cards, credit cards, some have debit cards tied to the bank, some don't. Our club doesn't use credit cards. It just varies, but that's, you know, you would want information on any kind of credit card transactions as well. And then how to prepare. So, I say this and I say it to myself, always best to prepare all year long, but in the absence of doing that, definitely, you know, as the year is coming to a close and you're wrapping up the records for the year, it really is easiest to kind of keep track of stuff throughout the year, because if you have to backtrack for a signature or something like that, it's always easier to do it within a short time frame than, you know, in some cases it could be almost a year later. So ensure that the records are accessible. You know, we use Dropbox for our clubs where we share everything, store everything. I can just go in and see all the check copies and all that stuff. It could be physical records. That's fine too. Julie's keeping them at her house and they're showing up there. That works. Just access to everything. The more you can kind of hand over to the auditor, the better. I mean, we're not in a position within our clubs of wanting to hide anything ever. Or, you know, it's easier for an auditor who typically in this case, not always, but in many cases will be, you know, volunteering and doing this on their own time and not getting paid for it. So you want to make it as easy for them as you can. And then throughout the year, things to look for, make sure that, you know, disbursements going out, whether it be checks or other forms of payment, that there's approved, whether it's in the budget or some board action or club action, whatever it is. You know, make sure that as you're going, that there's support for everything you're doing. Make sure the checks are signed by the right people. You know, every club is different. Your bylaws or procedures should specify whether checks can be signed by one people or two people, and or if that's driven by a dollar limit or anything else, whatever the policy is for your club, just make sure that that's being done. And then reconcile the bank statements to the ledger at the end of the month, make sure everything's accounted for, that there aren't any, payments that nobody knows about and they show up on the bank statement, but you haven't recorded them or kind of categorize them in the right place. So those are just kind of steps to take throughout the year. I recommend keeping check copies with the documentation. If they're scanned and stored in Dropbox like ours are, I ask our treasurer to keep them together. It's just a lot easier. Or if they're separated, at least I ask them to kind of name the file with the check number, so it's easy to connect the two. So whatever you can do to make it easier to kind of match things up. And then I will emphasize having supporting documentation for credit cards, and by credit cards, I also mean debit cards. It's really easy to use credit cards for stuff and not have kind of any support to go with it. So I do recommend, whether it's a form of a check request, a request for reimbursement, whatever your club uses to, whatever club members use to request payments, keep that all together in one place. What the auditor will do, there's no single approach. Everybody will approach this a little differently. But generally, these are the kinds of things for this type of audit within our clubs to expect. Making sure that checks are signed by the right people. And that's typically a treasurer and maybe a president. But it could be different for any given club. Verification that checks that require dual signatures have them. I mentioned that before. Making sure that all disbursements are approved, whatever your process is, that, the treasurer's not just randomly writing checks without knowing that there's some sort of support or approval for it at the board or club level. Auditor will verify that everything's accounted for, so if someone's going through a bank statement and checks and sees a check written for, $500 and that $500 isn't recorded anywhere, that's going to be a problem. And then just verification that the bank balance agrees to the final treasurer's report. It is always possible on a final report, you could have a deposit or a check in transit. It's kind of rarer these days, but it could happen, and that's okay as long as you're doing the reconciliation to the bank account and you have everything accounted for. There are other things, but those are kind of the main things I think that an auditor in this circumstance would be looking to do. And then how do you respond to questions? So there will be questions most likely about certain transactions, unless everything's so perfectly documented and maintained that everything is really obvious. It's likely that there will be a question about what something was for. That's probably the most common. Don't be scared. These are questions you can answer. And if you don't know, it's fine. You don't have to know everything right away. You need time to go back in your records or emails or whatever it is to look for evidence of documentation of something. Just say so. It's not bad if you don't remember everything off the top of your head. And then kind of at the end, the auditor will submit a report. I don't know what everybody does. This is just kind of the suggested SIA procedure. Submit a report to the board that notes the following. This is kind of what we do. So cash at the beginning of the year, total receipts, total disbursements, and then the cash balance in the year. So that's just accounting for cash from one year to the next and everything that happened in between at a very summary level. You don't need to include detail and a communication to the board about every transaction. Just kind of a general overview of the activity for the year is probably sufficient. And then if the auditor uncovers any irregularities, anything that the treasurer can't respond to adequately, can't explain, check for $500 that, forgot to write down what it was for, anything like that, or checks that, weren't signed by the right people, anything like that, should be communicated. It just doesn't necessarily have to be a horrible thing. It's information to say, you know, I noted that, you know, while everything's accounted for, I did notice that some checks weren't signed by, you know, 2 people when they should have been, as an example. And then even if there's nothing irregular or something that looks technically wrong, they could have recommendations for better maintaining the financial records and making it clearer what things are for. So those should be included in a report. And then I've just kind of, this is small, I apologize. This is just an example of 2 reports from our club. This one is, took out the numbers so you don't see how much or how little money we have. Actually, I did that because this is being recorded and will be out for the world to see. It's not that I care if you guys see it. So this is just kind of the very high level, you know, here's what we started with, what we brought in, what we spent, what we were left with at the end of the year. And then just a comment that everything's in order. So nothing negative or of concern reported in this particular example. And then the next one is an example where I did have comments on recommendations for our club, and it was mainly around, you know, we were cutting checks, you know, dispersing checks for things that we knew were in the budget. So there was technically some sort of approval, but we were really inconsistent on when we were requiring people to submit a document, a form for a request for payment, whether it be in a reimbursement or to pay someone else. And so I just recommended that the club kind of really tighten up, you know, the expectation within our club procedures about when that should be required and when it should not. And so we have gotten a lot better about that. I also made a recommendation, I don't think it's in the letter, I just kind of said it in person to the club, which was, you know, how you store documents can make a big difference in how an audit goes and someone's willingness to do it year after year. When it's organized, files are labeled clearly with what they are. It makes it a lot easier for someone. It makes this not a scary job for someone to come in and do. So I've made recommendations around just how the files are organized. But that's kind of it, you know, it's pretty, I make it sound really simple, and it is, you know, if everything's in order, the audit process goes super smoothly. If things are scattered and all over the place, it makes it really hard for an auditor, which is why I think it's really important for the treasurers to kind of be the gatekeeper of the information. It is essentially your job as treasurer to keep everything organized and in one place and make sure everything's documented appropriately so that someone can come in as they have a right to. It's club's money, right, to just validate everything's in order. So I will leave it with that and see if there are any questions.
Hi,
or
this is Cookie.
comments. Hi,
Sorry.
Cookie.
I'm from SI Visalia. We do a quarterly review. We call it a review, not an audit. Although one of the people on the committee this year is an accountant. And we go through all that, and we're using QuickBooks, and we have some really standard rules on if you want to check, you have to turn in the form and your receipts, things like that. But it's not, we've not really done an audit. Now we do have one of our, she's a former member now, but she's an accountant, and she's been doing our taxes for years and years. And so I'm assuming she looks it over a bit when she's doing it. We give her the backup of the QuickBooks, and we give her some documents that she asks for. I'm not sure if we're supposed to do a formal audit every year.
I mean, it's good that you're doing it quarterly. I actually like that a lot. I don't, this is a requirement in any sense.
I mean, by an accountant, because none
no,
of
it definitely does not have to be done by an accountant. You know, I happen to be an accountant and I do it for my club, but I'm not doing it really in my capacity as a CPA. As I am. I'm doing it as a member of the club that's not involved in the record keeping throughout the year. No, it doesn't have to be super, you know, if this were a full-fledged audit, it would cost money and it would be a lot more detailed than this. So no, it's just someone that's willing to look at it and can confidently come back to the club and say everything's in order. You know, we have had clubs in our region with, you know, treasurers that took money. It does happen. We don't like to think it would, but it does. And that's kind of what we're guarding against. You know, it's
Well, we feel confident in the review that if we had someone who was inclined to do that, it would catch it. But I'm not sure what else we would need to do. I'm aware that I've been told that if a member were to request an audit, or maybe go to region and say, I want my club audited, we would have to by law to do that. But no one's ever said that.
Yeah. I think what you're doing sounds good. I would consider where there might be something slightly more formal at the end of the year. Especially well, I guess on two fronts. If your club turns over the treasurer regularly, it's always a good idea for the new incoming treasurer to know everything's in order when she starts. Conversely, if you have a treasurer that is treasurer year after year after year, you also want to be super careful because now you're putting a whole lot of confidence in that person. And it's not about the person as much as when someone's in a position for a long time, it's a lot easier to kind of get away with things.
Yeah.
So
the bylaws say 3 years max.
Yeah, that's good.
And we've been mostly doing that. And when there's a new treasurer, when I was treasurer, they didn't have any instructions. So I did that when I was working. So I wrote instructions but I also visited with the treasurer once a month to help her reconcile. So for a whole year, I did that. Now she's able to do it herself, but I still meet with her occasionally.
Yeah,
and when we have a new treasurer, I think she's going to do it one more year. When we have a new treasurer, we'll both help her get through the instructions and get comfortable with it. But we still do the quarterly. I think that's enough, especially with all the steps there has to be in place before people get a check.
Yeah, that's good though. You want to make sure that continues to happen. So
yeah.
Let me just ask you, when you do your quarterly reviews, is that like, what's the result of that? Does it get reported back? Hey, we've done this, everything's fine.
Yes.
Okay.
In fact, I'll be doing that on Monday. I'm the chairman of that committee.
Okay.
Can we get a copy of that year-end report? You don't have to send the numbers. I just would like to use that as a format for doing that, because we haven't really said that at the end of the year formally. We've report every quarter, but I wouldn't mind having a report like that to hand in.
Sure. Yes, I can send it to you. I actually think it's on the SIA website.
Okay.
I actually think that's where I got it, but I'm happy to send it to you.
Oh, I can look on SIA.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
How about, do you guys, Nancy and Julie, do you use kind of any formal communication at the end of the year? Or?
So Laura Cross has done it for I don't think it had been done until a few years ago, or it had been a while. And so she had a similar report that she used to present to the board and to the general membership after it was done. And then we sat and looked through it and made sure the numbers, like what she saw on the bank statements and everything, agreed to what I had.
Okay, that makes sense.
And then she had like recommendations, like we weren't doing dual signatures. We don't do formal like check requests, but people will send me their receipts. Like I won't write a check unless I have that receipt. So
yeah.
Yes, our person that has done it the last 2 years, who is not the treasurer, has done a letter and made recommendations to us also. And the
Okay.
letter is real similar to the one you did.
Okay, good.
I think she picked it up from the SIA website.
You know what? Anything they have out there, I'll grab.
That's what it's there for.
That's what it's there for. And it's kind of short and sweet and makes perfect sense. So I like it. It's, you know, like I said, there's no one approach. Anyone looking at it can kind of do whatever they want. There's in this circumstance, not really a script per se, but it's really kind of all about the cash and making sure it's protected and accounted for. And again, you know, it's somewhat dependent on your club procedures, right? So if your club procedures use, like, let's say Visalia, you must have this every time, then an auditor's going to look that you have that every time. If you're, you know, in Julie's club saying, as long as I have a receipt, that's fine. And that's what they're going to be looking for. So it's going to vary based on what your procedures are. And if it, you know, again, if it starts to look a little like, this isn't, I'm not super confident in this, they can always make a recommendation to Julie and say, you know, instead of the receipt, you might want to have a formal document. Or they might, if they say this is working fine, then it's working fine. Because don't get me wrong, I'm not suggesting you have a document. If what you're doing works, it works. So, alrighty, that's all I got. If it was helpful.
Thank you.
Very helpful. You are welcome.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Absolutely. I'm gonna stop.
And thanks for posting it on Facebook because it reminded me.
I don't always do that, but I'm like, you know, I originally was gonna go to the Live Your Dream Awards in Clovis tonight. It's happening right now. And so it wasn't
The
gonna
35?
the 35, yeah.
Wow, yeah.
So I was gonna like reschedule this, which is why I hadn't really even posted it at all. And then I decided not to go because I've been sick and didn't want to travel and get everybody else sick. So I stayed home to do this instead. And I'm happy to spend the evening with you all.
Cool.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. You are welcome.